real wage growth was forecast at 0.75% this financial year. That's now been revised down to 0.25%. Should that give taxpayers confidence that the measures are working for them?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that just reflects the near-term uptick in the inflation forecast. So, as you know, the real wages calculation involves wages growth and inflation, and for the same reasons as the answer to Katina's question, there's been an uptick in the near term in the inflation forecast, and that has impacted on the real wages forecast. But when it comes to real wages, remember that around the time of the election last year, real wages were falling 3.4%, and there has been a substantial improvement since then. We've actually just seen 2 consecutive quarters of real wages growth, which is good progress. We still expect to see annual wages growth in a sustained way next year. That hasn't changed in the Treasury forecasts. Any of those near-term changes are more a reflection of the inflation part of the story than the wages part of the story.
We saw the forecast from the May budget for migration quite a bit off. How confident are you that Treasury is forecasting that correctly now? And quite apart from the kind of changes announced in the migration strategy, is Treasury changing the way it forecasts migration in any way to try and get that more exact?
Well, they're doing the best they can in an area that has been pretty volatile. And by far the biggest reason why we saw an increase in net overseas migration last year was international students. They came back much faster than anybody anticipated. Claire O'Neill and the other colleagues did a good job of explaining that, I thought, earlier in the week. So we had the peak in net overseas migration last year. We expect it to more or less halve by next year. Obviously, there is an element of volatility in demand-driven programs, but the really important thing to conclude from the migration strategy released earlier in the week is that because of our migration strategy and the steps that Claire O'Neill and others are taking, we expect 180,000 fewer migrants over the course of the forward estimates. And that, I think, is important progress, which recognises that the net overseas migration came back faster than anybody was anticipating. Still had a lower population outcome compared to what was expected before COVID in the last few years, but we recognise that we could do more in the demand-driven components of net overseas migration so that there's more integrity and so that we are clamping down on where there is an obvious need to do so. So we're going to come back through this way. We're going to go Claire, then Charles, and then in front of you.
Thanks, Trevor. There are millions of Australians who are struggling with cost of living right now. They weren't on welfare, they don't have a childcare-aged child, they don't have a chronic illness that needs a lot of scripts. They were excluded from the majority of the cost of living measures in May. There are none in my EFO. Can you guarantee that those households who are really struggling, particularly with mortgage repayments, will have some relief? And why should they have to wait for May if that is the case?
Well, first of all, I think our cost of living relief, $23 billion across a range of areas, is deliberately designed to impact on different parts of the community. And it is relatively broad when it comes to things like bulk billing, anyone with a kid under 16, all of the other measures that you've talked about spread across the economy. You're right that we have said that this is not a mini budget. This update is effectively a stock take rather than a long list of brand new measures, and we will consider the budget conditions and the economic conditions between now and the May budget to see whether we will provide more cost of living help. But I say to every Australian under cost of living pressure right now, one of the best ways that we can get downward pressure on inflation, which is smashing household budgets, is to provide the kind of responsible economic management which is a feature of this budget update. And that has been recognised by experts like the IMF, the OECD, the ratings agencies, the RBA governor and others. Our budget strategy is putting downward pressure on inflation. It's inflation which is hurting people right around Australia. The sooner we can get on top of it, the better. And this budget position and this responsible economic management is part of that effort.